My sister leaned across the table, smirking like she'd been waiting for this moment her whole life. "Clarissa," she said, her voice sharp as glass, "I never asked you to waste your savings on Dad's treatment. That was your choice. And now you're broke. Don't look at me for help. I'm not your charity." Her words hit me harder than the silence that followed. I'd given up everything for family, and here was my own sister laughing in my face. That day wasn't just about losing my job. It was the day I lost her. My name is Clarissa. I'm 35 years old. And this is the story of how my sister mocked my pain. If you had asked me a year ago what I feared most, I would have said failure. Not death, not loneliness, not even aging, but failure. The kind that crushes you in front of everyone, strips you bare of pride, and leaves you standing with nothing but your shame. And that day, my worst fear came true. It was a Tuesday morning, sharp sunlight cutting through the blinds of my small downtown apartment. I sat hunched at my kitchen table, my laptop open, my hands trembling as I read the email again. Effective immediately. "We regret to inform you." Restructuring. The words blurred. My chest felt tight, like someone had reached inside and pressed their thumbs against my ribs. 10 years at that company. 10 years of late nights, skipped vacations, and loyalty that ran deeper than common sense. And just like that, I was gone. I wanted to scream, to call someone, to beg for an explanation. But all I could do was close the laptop and sit in silence, listening to the ticking clock on the wall. What made it worse, what twisted the knife, was knowing I had no safety net. Months of paying for Dad's medical bills had drained my savings. I'd cashed out my small retirement fund to keep him comfortable during his last year, and when he passed, I thought I'd have time to rebuild. But life doesn't pause to let you breathe. And now, with no job, no savings, and bills piling like bricks on my back, I had nothing. Well, not exactly nothing. I had my sister, Nora, 2 years younger. Polished, stylish, the kind of woman who walks into a room and makes people sit up straighter. She worked at a high-end marketing firm across town, drove a new Cadillac, lived in a house with floor-to-ceiling windows. Nora was the one with the easy charm, the clever jokes, the perfect timing. She always had been. When we were kids, she was the golden girl, the one teachers adored and neighbors admired. I was the steady one, the reliable one, the one who covered chores when she snuck out or helped her cram before exams. We weren't enemies. But we weren't friends either. Still, she was family. And when you're drowning, you'll reach for any rope, even if it's frayed. So that night, with my pride crumpled in my pocket, I drove to Nora's house. Her place was glowing when I arrived, the wide porch light spilling across the driveway, laughter echoing faintly from inside. I stood there for a moment, gripping the steering wheel, rehearsing the words in my head. "Nora, I need help. Nora, I lost my job. Nora, I don't know what to do." I hated all of them. Still, I forced myself up the steps and rang the doorbell. When she opened the door, she looked like she'd stepped out of a magazine. Black silk blouse, slim gold jewelry, hair shining under the light. She smiled at first, then tilted her head in curiosity. "Clarissa, this is a surprise." I tried to smile, but it faltered. "Can we talk?" She ushered me in, poured me a glass of wine I didn't really want, and we sat in her perfectly arranged living room. For a moment, I almost lost my nerve. The scent of lavender candles, the faint hum of a jazz playlist, the way she perched elegantly on the sofa, it all made me feel like an intruder in a life that wasn't mine. But I had no choice. So I told her. The words spilled out like water from a cracked dam. The job loss, the empty bank account, the fear gnawing at me in the quiet hours. I thought, foolishly, that she might take my hand, offer comfort, tell me it would be okay. Instead, she laughed. Not a soft, nervous laugh. Not even the kind of laugh people use to cover discomfort. "Whoa." Nora threw her head back and laughed, sharp and unrestrained, like I just told the funniest joke she'd heard all week. When she finally caught her breath, she looked at me with sparkling eyes and said, "Oh, Clarissa. Only you could work 10 years at the same boring place and end up with nothing to show for it." My stomach dropped. She kept going. "Honestly, I don't know how you expected this to turn out. You've always played it safe, clinging to jobs no one else wanted, never aiming higher. And now you're, well, broke and unemployed. Maybe this is the universe telling you to stop being so small." That word sliced me open more than any other. I stared at her, my mouth dry, my hands trembling around the stem of the wineglass. "Nora, I came to you because I thought you'd understand. Because I need help." Her smile sharpened. "Help? Clarissa, I can't carry you. I've worked too hard to get where I am. You can't expect me to throw it all away because you weren't smart enough to protect yourself." Her words echoed in the silence that followed. I stood up slowly, setting the glass on her pristine coffee table. "You don't have to throw anything away. I just thought maybe you'd care." For a brief second, something flickered in her eyes. Hesitation, maybe even guilt. But then it vanished, replaced by that same glossy arrogance. "Well," she said, standing too, "maybe this is the wake-up call you needed. Sink or swim, Clarissa. That's how the world works." I walked out of her house that night with my heart in shreds and my pride in ashes. Her laughter followed me down the steps, clinging to my skin like smoke. But here's the thing Nora didn't understand. People like me, the ones who've lost everything, we don't just drown. Sometimes we learn how to breathe underwater. And sometimes we come back up swinging. Hang on, before I tell you what happened next, make sure you've subscribed and left your thoughts in the comments. This part gets intense. When I left Nora's house that night, her laughter ringing in my ears, I drove aimlessly through the city streets until the lights blurred and the gas gauge blinked. By the time I made it home, I felt hollow. Sleep never came. I just lay there, staring at the ceiling, replaying every word she said. But the thing is, Nora's reaction shouldn't have surprised me. If I'm being honest, the cracks had been there all along. Let me take you back. Growing up, Nora and I were two sides of the same coin. I was the eldest, the one who followed rules, made lists, and earned gold stars for neat handwriting. Nora. She was wild sunshine. She danced barefoot in the rain, snuck out to meet boys at the lake, lied to Mom about homework and still somehow pulled A's. People forgave Nora things they would never have forgiven me for. I remember one night when I was 16 and she was 14. Dad had fallen asleep in his armchair, and Mom was working late at the diner. Nora came to me in a swirl of perfume she'd stolen from Mom's dresser. Her lips stained red with cherry lipstick. "Cover for me, Clarissa," she whispered, already tugging on her denim jacket. "Where are you going?" I asked, alarmed. "Out. Don't wait up." And before I could argue, she was gone. When Mom came home at midnight and found Nora missing, I lied. Said she was asleep upstairs. I took the scolding for not keeping the kitchen clean, for letting the laundry sit, anything to distract from Nora's absence. She slipped in through the back door at dawn, smelling like smoke and freedom, and thanked me with a wink. That was how it always was. I was the shield. She was the sparkle. As we grew older, our paths split in ways that only widened the distance between us. I went to community college, worked nights at the grocery store, and studied business administration because it was practical. Nora, on the other hand, snagged a scholarship to a big city university. She majored in communications, interned at glamorous firms, and posted photos of herself at rooftop parties while I balanced ledgers in dim classrooms. It wasn't jealousy, at least not at first. I was proud of her. I thought, maybe foolishly, that when we both grew up we'd meet in the middle. That she'd need me as much as I'd always needed her. But life has a cruel way of showing you where you stand. When Dad got sick, it was me who drove him to chemo, me who sold my car to pay for his medication, me who sat beside him through the long nights when his breathing rattled like a broken engine. Nora visited when it fit her schedule. Sometimes she breezed in with expensive candles or gourmet soup, snapping selfies with Dad for her social media before rushing off to another event. "You're so strong, Clarissa," she'd say, patting my shoulder. "I don't know how you do it." As if strength was a choice. As if I hadn't been forced into it because she couldn't bear the weight. When Dad died, she gave a beautiful eulogy, her voice steady, her dress perfect, her makeup immaculate. People wept. They hugged her. They called her the good daughter. And I, the one who had held his hand through every painful treatment, stood in the background, invisible. That was the first time resentment rooted itself in me, deep and poisonous. After the funeral, Nora went back to her glamorous life. I went back to bills, to empty rooms, to the suffocating silence of loss. I worked harder at my job, climbed into middle management, saved what little I could. It wasn't much, but it was stability. And stability, I thought, was enough. Until it wasn't. The truth is, Nora never respected me. She tolerated me. To her, I was a reminder of everything she'd outgrown. She once told me, after too much wine at Thanksgiving, "You're the safe one, Clarissa. The boring one. Every family needs one." I laughed it off at the time, but the sting never left. Still, I loved her. Despite everything, she was my sister. That's why losing my job and my savings felt like something I could confess to her. I thought maybe this once she'd lower her guard and be there for me. But the night she laughed at my misery, I realized something chilling. Nora didn't just fail to care. She enjoyed it. My downfall fed something in her. Pride, superiority, maybe even relief that for once, I couldn't overshadow her with responsibility. And that was the moment my sorrow began to harden into something else. Something sharper. Because here's the truth. Betrayal doesn't come from strangers. Comes from the people you thought would protect you. Cuts deeper, burns longer because you never saw it coming. In the days after, I replayed our childhood moments in a new light. Her sly smirk when I covered for her lies. Her shrug when Dad praised her for work I'd quietly helped her finish. Her careful avoidance of responsibility when Mom got sick, when Dad needed us most. She had always been this way. I just hadn't wanted to see it. The cracks weren't new. They were just wider now, impossible to ignore. And as I sat alone in my apartment, staring at the eviction notice that had arrived in the mail, I made a silent promise. Nora would never laugh at me again. Before we go any further, click subscribe and let me know in the comments. What would you have done in my shoes? There's a certain sound people make when they're laughing at you, not with you. It's sharp. It's cruel. It leaves an echo that sticks in your chest like smoke you can't cough out. That's the sound Nora made when I told her I'd lost everything back then. I remember the room in perfect detail. Her sitting room was all white marble and glass, one of those glossy magazine spreads that smelled like citrus cleaner and money. I was clutching the chipped mug she'd given me, filled with coffee I could barely taste. My hands trembled so much that drops spilled onto my jeans, but she didn't notice. Or maybe she did. And maybe she liked it. Wait, she said, slapping her manicured hand on the counter as if she needed to steady herself. Her laugh was high-pitched, almost girlish, like we were children again. You lost your savings. All of it. I nodded, ashamed. And your job, too. Oh my God, Clarissa, how does that even happen? You miss spreadsheet. Miss play it safe. You're always lecturing me about responsibility. And now look at you. The words stung because they were true, at least in part. I had always been careful. But when the company I gave 10 years of my life to folded overnight after a merger, there was nothing I could do. The severance was a pittance, swallowed whole by the debts I'd accumulated trying to stay afloat during Dad's illness. I tried to explain that to her to make her understand, but she wasn't listening. She was reveling. You're really broke?" she asked almost gleefully, as if she needed me to confirm it again. "Yes," I whispered. That was when she threw her head back and laughed. A laugh that started in her throat and spilled into the room like acid. "You know what this means, right?" she said between gasps of amusement. "It means you're the failure now. Not me. The boring, responsible one. Oh, Clarissa. Life is so ironic, isn't it?" Her words sliced through me like glass. "Don't say that," I said, my voice shaking. "I came here for support, not this." She smirked, sipping her wine like it was the most natural thing in the world. "Support? What do you expect me to do? Write you a check? Let you move in here? No, sweet sister. I worked for this life. I'm not about to let your bad luck drag me down." "Worked?" The word slipped out of me before I could stop it. "Nora, you wouldn't have half of what you do if it weren't for the people who've carried you along the way. Including me." Her eyes narrowed. "Oh, here we go. Saint Clarissa, reminding everyone of her sacrifices. You lived rent-free in my apartment during college," I snapped, the years of swallowed bitterness bubbling up. "I cooked for you, cleaned for you, covered your half of the bills until you found your footing. Dad's hospital bills. Do you think they paid themselves? I sacrificed everything while you flitted around pretending to help." For a split second, I thought I saw guilt flicker across her face. But then she smiled, slow, deliberate, venomous. "Maybe you should have invested less in Dad and more in yourself," she said. "Look where that got you." I swear the air left the room in that moment. My chest ached. My throat burned. "Don't you dare," I began, but she cut me off with a wave of her hand. "Save it, Clarissa. You made your choices. Don't resent me for making better ones." It was then that I noticed her phone sitting on the counter, screen glowing. A group chat open. My name flashing in bright text. I leaned in just enough to read the last few messages before she locked it. Her friends. Laughing emojis. A message from Nora herself. "Clarissa finally hit rock bottom. Told you she wasn't as perfect as she pretends." The humiliation was complete. Not only had she laughed at my downfall in person, she'd broadcast it to her circle of friends, people I barely knew, as if my life was some sort of twisted entertainment. I stood so abruptly that the chair screeched against the tile. "I need to go," I said, my voice brittle. She raised her glass, unfazed. "Good luck, sis. Maybe you'll find some charity work to keep you busy." I stumbled out into the night, the cold air biting at my cheeks, tears spilling faster than I could wipe them away. That was the lowest point of my life. Not losing my job. Not the dwindling savings account. Not the eviction notice pinned to my door. No, the lowest point was realizing that the one person I thought would never turn her back on me had not only turned away, but shoved me down and laughed while I fell. I didn't eat for 2 days. Barely slept. My phone buzzed with bills, with rejection emails, with reminders of how far I'd sunk. Every time I closed my eyes, I saw her smile, sharp, mocking, triumphant. And something inside me cracked. Because grief turns into something else when it festers. Hardens. Sharpens. By the end of that week, my sorrow had curdled into resolve. She had taken joy in my ruin. She had humiliated me publicly. She had thrown every sacrifice I'd ever made back in my face. And I decided, in the silence of my one-bedroom apartment, that I would never be her victim again. I didn't know exactly how yet. But I knew one thing for certain. Nora's laughter would be silenced. Real quick. Subscribe and share your thoughts below before we get to the part that still makes my heart race. I didn't leave my apartment for 3 days after Nora's words ambush. But in that silence, something started to stir. It began as a flicker, the thought that maybe my life wasn't over. That maybe losing my job wasn't the end but the ugly, necessary beginning of something else. And then I remembered her words. Her laugh. The chat messages on her phone. I could forgive a lot. But not that. Not turning me into a punchline. If she wanted a show, I'd give her one. The first step was obvious. Information. I knew Nora's life well enough to know that she thrived on appearances. She had clawed her way into her dream job at a mid-sized marketing firm downtown. A job she bragged about like she'd landed a Fortune 500 CEO position. It wasn't glamorous, but it came with a kind of stability and paycheck that made her feel untouchable. I also knew how she got it. Not through brilliance, not through hustle, but because her manager, Paul Hendricks, had a soft spot for her. Paul was the kind of man who loved to be flattered. Nora had wrapped him around her little finger in record time, coasting while others did the real work. And me. I'd spent a decade in operations, handling logistics, client relations, budgets, campaigns. Everything she bragged about doing I had done better, cleaner and longer. But none of that mattered if nobody knew it. So I started small. I dusted off my resume and began tailoring it, not for just any company, but for hers. I spent sleepless nights scrolling through LinkedIn, memorizing the names and faces of her colleagues, studying the company's projects, successes and failures. I wasn't going in blind. I couldn't afford to. Of course there were doubts. Who was I kidding? I was unemployed, broke, humiliated. The rent was overdue. My fridge was empty except for a carton of milk past its date and a half-used stick of butter. Every rejection email stung worse than the last. Some didn't even bother to send one. The temptation to give up was strong. But then I'd hear it again. That laugh. The way her voice tilted with cruel delight. And I'd push through another night. A week later, I was sitting in the public library, hunched over a computer, when I stumbled on something that made my pulse quicken. Nora's company was hiring. Not just hiring, they were desperate. A new client had come on board, a huge account that could make or break them, and they needed fresh talent to handle the workload. The posting was for a senior project coordinator. Responsibilities: budget management, client communication, process streamlining. My bread and butter. It was like the job had been written for me. But I couldn't just apply. Well, that would be too easy. Too obvious. If I wanted to beat Nora at her own game, I needed to walk in there not as a desperate applicant, but as the answer to their prayers. So I prepared. I spent hours rebuilding my portfolio, pulling case studies from old projects, showcasing the numbers that spoke louder than any cover letter could. I reached out to a couple of my old colleagues, people who still respected me, asking if they'd vouch for me. Some didn't answer, but a few did. And that was enough. I practiced my pitch until my throat went raw. And when the interview came, I walked into that glass building not as the broken woman Nora had laughed at, but as someone reborn. The interview room was all sleek lines and cold air conditioning. 3 people sat across from me, including Paul Hendricks himself. "Tell us about yourself," he began, smiling in that rehearsed corporate way. I didn't flinch. I told them about 10 years of managing accounts worth millions, about handling crises without losing a client, about streamlining processes that saved departments hundreds of hours. I told them about being the steady hand when everyone else was drowning. Paul leaned forward, nodding, clearly impressed. And then, the kicker. "I understand you already have someone in the company with your last name," one of the panelists said. "Any relation to Nora Alvarez?" My stomach tightened. "She's my sister," I said evenly. Was. A flicker of recognition across Paul's face. "And what does she think about you applying here?" I let myself smile. "She doesn't know yet." The panel chuckled. Paul did too, though his eyes narrowed, studying me. By the end of the interview, I knew I'd nailed it. And 2 days later the call came. "Clarissa," Paul's voice said through the crackling line, "we'd like to offer you the position." I should have felt relief, excitement, gratitude. But what I felt was sharper than all of that. It was the electric thrill of payback starting to take shape. Because Nora had no idea what was coming. The first week was surreal. I kept my head down, doing the work, proving myself. My colleagues warmed quickly to me, grateful to have someone competent on board. Clients sent emails praising my efficiency. Paul stopped by my desk more than once, smiling like he'd stumbled on a hidden gem. And all the while I waited. I knew it was only a matter of time before Nora noticed me. And when she did, it happened on a Wednesday morning. I was reviewing a campaign budget when I heard the click of heels in the hallway. Laughter, bright and hollow, spilling into the office. Her laughter froze. And then slowly I turned in my chair. There she was, my sister, my betrayer, walking into the office like she owned the place, coffee cup in hand, hair perfectly styled. She stopped dead when she saw me. For a second her face went blank. Then the smile returned, wider this time, but brittle. "Clarissa." "Morning, Nora," I said smoothly, as if it were the most normal thing in the world. The color drained from her face. She stammered something about needing to talk later, then scurried to her desk. And I smiled because the cracks had started to show. But revenge isn't a single moment. It's a process. And mine had only just begun. Hang on, before I tell you what happened next, make sure you've subscribed and left your thoughts in the comments. This part gets intense. Nora didn't speak to me for the first week after discovering I worked at her firm. She avoided eye contact in meetings. She hovered at the far end of the conference table. She laughed louder than usual at other people's jokes, as if her volume alone could prove she wasn't rattled. But she was. I could feel it. Every time she glanced at me, I saw it in her eyes. Panic. Still she tried to play her old game. On a Thursday morning, she cornered me by the coffee machine. "So," she said, stirring sugar into her mug with deliberate slowness. "You work here now." "That's right." Smiled. "Senior project coordinator." Her hand trembled slightly as she lifted the spoon. "Funny, I didn't hear about your hire." "Maybe you weren't paying attention," I replied smoothly. Her lips pressed into a thin line. I could practically hear her mind racing. How did Clarissa get in here? Why didn't Paul ask me? What if she makes me look bad? She had reason to worry. Because that was exactly what I planned to do. The opportunity came faster than I expected. A major client, Vanguard Apparel, was unhappy with their campaign. Deadlines were slipping. Budgets were bleeding. Nora had been leading the account, but she'd been so busy chasing compliments that she'd ignored the problems. Paul called me into his office one morning. "Clarissa," he said, rubbing his temples, "I need someone to steady this ship. You've impressed us these past few weeks. Would you be willing to step in as point of contact?" My chest tightened with the thrill of it. This was her account, her pride and joy, and he was handing it to me. "I'd be happy to," I said softly. From that moment, I worked like a woman possessed. Late nights, early mornings, calls with the client to rebuild trust, detailed spreadsheets mapping out timelines and expenses, calm, precise answers to every question. Team noticed. The client noticed. Even Paul noticed. And Nora, I fumed. She'd storm into meetings, cutting me off mid-sentence. She'd send long, passive-aggressive emails trying to undermine my decisions. But it only made her look worse. Because while she whined, I delivered. 2 weeks later, Vanguard Apparel renewed their contract for another year, under my leadership. The celebration meeting was brutal for her. Paul raised a toast to me. The team applauded. And Nora sat there, red-faced, clapping stiffly, her smile tighter than a noose. I thought that might be enough. But revenge isn't about enough. It's about balance. And balance demanded more. The final blow came on a rainy Monday morning. Paul called an all-hands meeting. We gathered in the glass conference room, rain streaking the windows, the city a blur beyond them. "I have an announcement," Paul said. "After reviewing recent performance, we've decided to restructure account management. Effective immediately, Clarissa Alvarez will be promoted to Senior Account Manager, overseeing multiple campaigns." Gasps rippled through the room. I sat perfectly still, heart thundering as the applause broke out. Paul continued. "Unfortunately, this means some roles are being reassigned. Nora Alvarez will no longer be leading client accounts. She'll transition into an internal support role." Silence. Nora's face went pale. "An internal role," she echoed, her voice barely above a whisper. Paul nodded. "We need stability, and frankly, Clarissa has proven she can deliver it. This isn't a demotion." But everyone knew it was. Her title was smaller. Her responsibilities stripped. She would no longer face clients, no longer hold the spotlight she craved. She had lost her job. And I had taken it. After the meeting, she stormed into the hallway. I followed slowly, savoring the moment. She spun on me, eyes blazing. "You did this. You stole everything from me." I met her fury with calm. "No, Nora. You gave it away. You laughed at me when I was down. You mocked me when I needed support. All I did was prove what I was capable of. You did the rest yourself." Her mouth opened then closed. For once she had no comeback. And in that silence I felt it, the shift. The power was mine now. The aftermath was quiet but delicious. I thrived in my new role. Clients trusted me. Team leaned on me. Paul spoke of a future where I was part of leadership. Nora shrank. She came in late, left early, avoided everyone's eyes. The sparkle she once wore like armor had dulled. Sometimes I almost felt pity for her. Almost. But then I'd remember that day in her kitchen. Her laugh slicing through me like a knife. Her words ringing in my ears. And the pity evaporated. People say revenge is hollow. That it doesn't heal. Maybe that's true. But as I sat in my office one evening, the city lights glittering below, I knew one thing for certain. When Nora laughed in my face, she thought I'd stay broken. She was wrong. I hadn't just rebuilt myself. I'd risen higher than she ever imagined. And in the end, she was the one left in the shadows. And that's how it all ended. The laughter silenced, the tables turned. She thought I'd stay broken forever. But I proved her wrong in the most unexpected way. If this story gripped you, don't forget to subscribe and drop your thoughts in the comments, because the next one might just hit even closer to home.